Welcome to Bracket U, a college basketball bracket podcast brought to you by Delphi Bracketology. We're in our 11th year of doing bracketology work. This is our third episode of Bracket U. I'm your host, Brian Tonsoni. Joining me tonight is Steve Painter, our Director of Media Credentials. We'd like to shout out our Delphi administration for their support of our club, for Bob Thompson for the intro music, Bryson Hutzel, one of our students, for the intro video, Jared Morris of the Back Home Network for all of his guidance in this podcast world. As we start talking brackets tonight, we are going to look at our seed line discussions between lines 2 and 3 and so forth down. We had a really good meeting today with our group where we broke up into committees, and each committee had a seed line, and they ranked those seed lines in order from a starting point. And then we went and looked at the teams that were right above each other between the two lines. And so Steve and I are going to break that down for you this evening. Steve, how you doing tonight?
Oh, doing pretty good. Good to be on the show.
So a couple teams have really made the 2-3 seed line really interesting, Steve, with Kentucky's wins. They got a huge road win. Houston did not have quad one wins, has now had 3 quad one wins in a row to match an excellent net. Those teams really put a lot of pressure on us at Bracketology for that 2-3 seed line. Right now, we have Houston as the last 2, and Tennessee, who was a 1 seed last week, as the first 3. And you really got Purdue in there at the 2 line and Marquette on the 3 line. Any 2 of those 4 could possibly be up to the 2 seed line. How do you see that breaking down?
Yeah, I think Tennessee is the team that we would be most likely to move back up. I mean, it was just about a week ago when we were considering them on the 1-2 line. And we were talking about, well, who's the most vulnerable to flip down to a 3. And we think Florida right now, biggest thing that's hurting them is just a really bad strength of schedule. They're at 247 on the non-conference. So Tennessee's, they've got a shot.
When it's so tight like that, a losing streak is what likely moves you down. Tennessee has moved down 5 spots from us, from the top 2 to the top 3 or 4 spots. They've lost 3 out of 4. And in the SEC, that's not damaging. I think Kentucky can lose a couple more and still be a 3 seed because of their body of work. But it is razor thin. You can find something positive about Houston to be a 2 seed, but you can also find something positive about Tennessee to be on that line. And Tennessee is going to continue to, when they win, get quality wins. And so each year, Steve, it's interesting to see what the top of the bracket looks like. It's might be the metrics one way, and then as you get down later, teams they get into some weird combinations, and we'll discuss that as we go. But our 2 seed line, we're going to stick with Purdue and Houston at the back end of the 2, and Tennessee and Marquette on that 3 line. And really, Steve, Michigan and Kansas State are quality resumes too that could be in contention for that 2 seed line. Moving to the 3-4. Oh, go ahead.
Oh, yeah, go ahead. Yeah, I just agree. Michigan State, Kansas, we've got them at the bottom of the 3, but, could move up and could move down, especially Michigan
Here's a team that you've been really interested in, and I think you think highly of, is Oregon. And Oregon's sitting at the top of our 4 with a lot of quad 1 wins and a couple nice wins. Why are you so high on Oregon? And we're constantly thinking about moving them into the 3 seed, if not higher.
Yeah, today I was examining the 4 seed line in our order, and so I was comparing, your Oregons and your Texas A&M, Ole Miss, Illinois, and I really still like Oregon the best. The one thing that really stands out is those quad 1 wins. They've got the second most quad 1 wins of any team in the whole field, and I think you have to respect that. They're 8-2 in quad 1. They're 9-4 in quad 1, quad 2 combined. They're 4-1 on the road. They've got a good strength of schedule at 14, 54 non-conference. They've just got a good resume. So I personally liked them, and I think the team that they could potentially replace would be a Michigan State. Michigan State, I was looking at who they've beaten, and it wasn't quite as impressive as Oregon. Where is it? lost track of my things, but yeah, Michigan State, I believe their biggest win was Ohio State, whereas Oregon's just got a number of big wins.
Didn't Oregon beat Alabama? Am I thinking
Yes, that's
that
it.
correctly?
They beat Alabama at a neutral court. It was they beat Texas A&M neutral court at Ohio State. They beat Maryland, and Maryland, I think, is a team on the rise as well.
I agree with you. They have been just rocketing up our bracket. And Michigan State is going to get into the teeth of their Big Ten schedule, too. Mm-hmm. And, we don't predict. So for those people listening, either live or later on in the podcast, we don't predict wins and losses and what we think is going to happen. We look at it as a body of work if this tournament started right now as best as we possibly can. There's a little bit of looking ahead, like when we've dealt with Houston. We know Houston's going to get some wins. They have a good net. We didn't drop them all the way out because they were 0-3 in quad one. We kept them in a range and knowing that they were going to win some games. But we try not to get into the prediction business. We try to just analyze the data. I think Oregon is very fascinating to me. I am in agreement with you. I'm going to take a look after the show on Michigan State's resume. Mm-hmm. And I think at least we can move Kansas, who we have at the 12 seed line or 12 overall seed, up to 11, put Michigan State on that back end of the 3-4 line.
Yeah.
Another thing that I thought you helped me with, and this is what we like, the students do a really good job of looking at this stuff, and they always open up our eyes as the sponsors of maybe looking at something. But Steve does a really good job, too, of diving in to all of the combinations of the data. Now, on our 4 or 5 seed line, dividing line, we have Illinois and Louisville, and you have a couple SEC teams, Ole Miss, Mississippi State, that are on the back end of the 4 and the front end of the 5. You're down a little bit on Illinois at that top 4 seed you were mentioning to me today. We moved them down to the last 4, but they have had a few losses, some illnesses and stuff to consider, but they might be a 5 seed, not a 4 seed. Share your thoughts on the Illini.
Yeah, I've been looking at a lot of just quality wins is kind of the main metric. I've been, it's an important one. And Illinois, I mean, they do have one really good one. It was at Oregon, the team that we were just talking about. But after that, a home win against Wisconsin and a win away at Indiana. And we don't really know if that's how impressive that is right now. So just as far as Illinois being there as a 4 seed, it just seemed like maybe they need a little bit more to be that high. So I thought they were a team that out of our 4 seeds might be the most vulnerable to move out.
So we have Louisville and Mississippi State. Wisconsin's having a good run too. Which one of those teams on the 5 seed line, if we were to replace Illinois, would you most likely want to move up?
I would probably say Louisville. They got some good quality wins against Duke, Clemson, a road win at Pitt, who at times has played really well. So I think Louisville's has got a decent chance. I'm looking at their quad 1 wins. It's respectable. It's right in there with everybody else. Good strength of schedule and a 5-1 record on the road. So I think those are some good characteristics that I personally like a little bit more than Illinois right now.
Yeah, and I think they lost to Duke, Steve. I don't know that they beat Duke.
Okay.
I think they lost to Duke, but they were competitive, and they're 9-1 in the ACC. And Louisville's been skyrocketing up too, and Ole Miss and Mississippi State have been back and forth. Mississippi State was a 3 seed at one point. They've lost a few games in a row now, and again, one loss doesn't make you have to drop down our bracket if you're tuning in, but several losses in a row as other teams win will make a bypass, if you would, up and down our seed list. So you're listening to Delphi Bracketology. I'm with Steve Painter. I'm Brian Tonsoni. If you're listening in live and want to drop a question, you can do that. We would be more than happy to answer any and all questions if that is the case. But we're now looking at the 5 and 6 range. And Steve, this is where things get really muddy because I think I think 1 through 8 is solid. And it's going to be interesting, the tournament this year, because there are teams on our 8 line that are really good programs that are struggling a little bit. But boy, if they get in a rhythm, we know they're competitive. And so these seed lines are really, really tough. We've changed them every day this week. within the seed line 6, 7, and 8, and then even moving teams up and down. But our last 5 seed is Memphis, and our top seed in the 6 seed line is UCLA. Anything there interesting to share out?
Yeah, I was looking at UCLA. They're out of the teams that we've got there on the 6th seed. I think I like them the best. They're 5 quad 1 wins, good strength of schedule. The non-conference is so. But yeah, I think they've got a definite chance to replace a team like a Memphis or a Mississippi State.
Memphis State struggles because in their conference they're not going to have a whole lot of chances to add. But boy, they had a great non-conference schedule. And UCLA, I'm looking at their resume right now: a neutral against Gonzaga, a neutral against Arizona. Teams in this range, beat Wisconsin. So they've really done a nice job of getting some quality wins. They have bounced back from a 4-game losing streak, which again, getting wins for your team. If you're listening and want to know where your team is, getting wins. We have Arizona, Missouri, and Clemson also on that 6th seed line. Some teams that have some good on their resume, teams that have some flaws. I'm going to dive into Missouri later this evening, Steve. They intrigue me to see a little more details about their resume on that 6th seed line. But we have a team on the top of the 7, West Virginia, which I think has really good quality wins, but a net of 44. And man, they've been hovering in that 6, 7 seed line. The difference between West Virginia, Clemson, or is there anyone else on the 7 seed line that we need to keep an eye on?
We've got Michigan in there on that 7 line, and at the time, but they've been dropping. So I think they're a team that could potentially they could go either way, but right now they're not playing quite as well. But yeah, I think of our 7s, I like West Virginia the best.
And there's some interesting teams on the back end of our 7 line. St. John's being one of them. They have an outstanding record, and they've had a good non-conference strength of schedule. They're in the Big East, which is a little down this year, but their best win is against. They don't have a win against a team in the tournament, and when I recognize that, I think they might even be down to the 8 seed. If they're on that cut line, despite an 18-3 record. They're 1-3 in quad 1, and that win is against Xavier at Xavier, and they're undefeated in quads 2, 3, and 4. So they have no blemishes, and they have wins. But that's a team that where your hot Maryland team that you talked about is right on their heels. Texas Tech, who's had a little bit of an inflated net all year, keeps continuing to win and add quad 1 wins. Those are teams that could pass St. John's because I think in those conferences they have better opportunities. Any thoughts? Expound a little bit more on Maryland. You mentioned them earlier that you really liked Maryland.
Yeah, it's kind of funny because a week ago I was kind of dogging on Maryland, and it's like I jinxed my my take, and because they went out that later that night last Thursday and just blew Illinois out on the road, and since then has done great. They won again last night, a solid win against another good tournament team in Wisconsin, and then also had a exciting game, but another road win at Indiana this past weekend. And just winning on the road in the Big Ten is tough to do, and it's impressive. So they all of a sudden went from a team on the slide, and they're just done a 180, and they're on the rise again. They're at an 18 net. 4 quad 1 wins, and they're looking pretty good.
I honestly think we can make a decision tonight that maybe they are on the 7 seed line, and St. John's or Creighton is down to the 8 seed line. And I just looked at their team sheet, and it's impressive. And when we talk, this is how quick things could happen if you win games. I was in agreement with you in our meeting last Thursday that we got to take a look at Maryland, moving them down into the play-in games. They were a last 10 seed for us. And then you go on the road and beat Illinois. You go on the road and beat Indiana. Road wins matter. And then you come home and beat a 5 seed, 4 seed team in Wisconsin. Those are three quality wins that shoot you up quite quickly. And so, I really, with the 18 net too, you don't see a lot of under 20 nets in the 8, 9, 10 seed range. And we have three. We have Maryland, Texas Tech, and Gonzaga. Some of that is computer manipulation, offense and defense. When you blow out a team early in the year by 50 or 60, your numbers look a little bit better. So I don't mind having teams like that, but I'm not sure that's the case in Maryland. I think Maryland's played a lot of close games. The only negative for me is a little bit of a road record, which they just got to, and strength of schedule in the non-conference. They didn't challenge themselves in the non-conference. I think that's going to keep them from rising too far. So we have Gonzaga and UConn at the back end of the 8 seed line. I think they're pretty safe. I don't think Oklahoma and Vanderbilt will push them out. I'm just shocked to be talking Gonzaga and UConn at the back of the 8. How do you feel about those two storied programs?
Yeah, it's strange, because let's say they're 8 seeds and they win their first game in the tournament. You're going to have a Gonzaga and a UConn going against a 1 seed in the second round, and that's pretty crazy. But that's also the kind of thing. There's been 8 seeds that have gone to the Final Four, so so they're a team to watch, to look out for. They're one of the best coach teams in the country. But it is very strange to see them this low. They're just not playing it as great right now. Gonzaga's only got 2 quad 1 wins, and then of course the conference they're in, they don't always have that many opportunities too. But they're the ones they've had, they're 2-5, so they're not doing as well as we're used to seeing Gonzaga.
And you bring up a good point. Those teams get hot late and still end up on the 8 seed line because they didn't gather enough quality on their resume. I think North Carolina went to the Final Four from the 8 spot at one point a few years back. That is how tough. And really, Steve, I'll continue with our discussion here, but one of the things that I found interesting in doing this over the years is how good the seed lines are. Before I did bracketology, I thought a 6 seed, 7 seed was, you got lucky to get in. You're not really a good team. When I realized that your last 6 seed and your first 7 seed are top 25 teams, and they're capable of winning games. You get to the Final Four. You got a 6 seed in the Final Four. Well, that's a top 25 team in college basketball. That was shocking to me when I finally realized that. We could even stretch that out to the top 8 seeds. That's your best 32 teams. And in college basketball now, with the transfer portal and NIL, I think you're in the top 30 or 40. You make the tournament, I think you can make a run. Obviously, the better seed, the better opportunity you have, and the better you've played. But to win 6 in a row, it probably takes the hottest team, maybe not the top seed. Your thoughts, did you have any revelations when you started? I think you joined 5 or 6 years ago in our group. How amazing those 6, 7, 8 seeds. We're talking UConn and Gonzaga as an 8 seed. They're still pretty good basketball teams.
Yeah, it is. And like you mentioned, getting hot, and I think just being, a fan of March Madness. I mean, obviously getting hot is probably the most important. Once you make it in, a lot of times, you can just throw their seeds out the window. And, you look at like an NC State last year that wouldn't have even made it in, and then just got hot in their conference tournament, snuck in, and just kept moving and went all the way to the Final Four. You can't take any of these teams lightly. They're all capable of doing really good things in the tournament.
Our 9 seed line, Oklahoma, Vanderbilt, St. Mary's, Ohio State, all have some nice wins, but they're not quite at the level of the other teams. Ohio State has been an interesting team. Another team like Maryland that struggled and lost some games in overtime. And then Ohio State has done a nice job since winning at Mackey, getting to a point where they're not safe at 12-8, I don't think, but they have picked up some quality wins on the road. Their strength of schedule, and they schedule strong in the non-conference. If they can avoid a long losing streak, I think they're going to go dancing a little bit. But there's another team that we had maybe even out at one point a couple of weeks ago that's in at the back end of our 9 seed. Your thoughts on either Oklahoma, Vanderbilt, St. Mary's, or Ohio State?
Yeah, it's back to Ohio State. I do remember going into the Purdue game. I'm pretty sure we had them out, and then a win at Mackey is huge. I mean, that is something the committee will remember. When you're looking at big wins, it's one of the biggest you can get. Yeah, I like them. All their other metrics are solid qualifications to make the tournament. But yeah, they just need to win more. They're 3-6 in quad one. 3 quad one wins is fine, but they're going to get lots more opportunity in the Big Ten. But they probably need to at least go 500 on those quad one wins from here on out, just to keep themselves solidly in. They don't want to go on a losing streak and then be in consideration to move on out.
And what's interesting too is, there's going to be some teams left out of the Big Ten tournament. And I'm not saying Ohio State is there, but you lose 2 or 3 and you get in the back end of tiebreakers and stuff. You could have a bunch of teams lumped together in the conference. And if the tiebreakers fall a certain way, you may find yourself at the 16th spot. And I don't think Ohio State will necessarily be in that, but they've got to avoid bad losses and they've got to avoid a accumulation. I think the reason we had them out is because they were 1 or 2 games above 500, and we generally don't keep teams in unless they're 4 games above 500 at this point of the season. There's always going to be outliers, as every trend is broken. Indiana State was left out and broke a trend last year. But we feel you've got to be at least 3 games or 4 games above 500 to be, at this point, to be included. And I think that's why we had Ohio State out, and then they've extended that a little bit. Same issue with North Carolina when we get down to our bubble. They're 4 games above 500 as of right now, and they lose to Duke, and now they're 13-10. They're in jeopardy of having too many losses despite whatever is on their resume. Steve, the last team before we go to our bubble is Baylor. Another storied program that has had some success and won national championships, is sitting as our first 10 seed with a 12-7 record, 3-6 in quad one, a quad 3 loss, only 2-5, but a really, really tough schedule, 16 non-conference, 8 overall. That's an interesting team to me that is that low. I'm not sure they need to be moved up, but they have fallen on some hard times lately.
Yeah. We've got them really we've got Ohio State as our last 9. Baylor's our top 10 seed, and they've got similar resumes. They're both 3-6 in quad one, so there are plenty of opportunities, but they're not making the most of those opportunities. But yeah, their strength of schedule is great, 8th overall. But yeah, not winning the games that they need to, and a 2-5 record on the road. That's probably what's holding them down. But yeah, that's another strange team that you're used to seeing up there at the top, and they're approaching the bubble, and kind of similar to, like you say, with North Carolina. North Carolina's 1-8 in quad one, and you think North Carolina, big time program, but they don't have the resume right now.
So they've lost to really good teams in the Big 12. They've lost at Iowa State. They lost at Arizona. They lost at BYU, not a tournament team. They've lost to TCU at home, and their wins, their quality win is maybe Arizona State. That's just inside our bracket. So they haven't taken advantage of some opportunities. They play Kansas Saturday. That's a big time win. That'll move you back up to a little safer position. So you've got really the next 6 games are against teams that are in our bracket: Kansas, Texas Tech, UCF, Houston, West Virginia, Arizona. I think they probably need to go at least 2 or 3 wins in there to stay away from a disastrous drop to maybe the bubble. So let's go to our last 4 teams in. San Diego State, another team that's kind of been safe for us for a long time in a conference that you're going to talk about here towards the end of the show. Pittsburgh got a big win over North Carolina. Those teams were both real close to the cut line. Pittsburgh pulls off the home win. Arizona State is holding on, and UCF has lost a few games in a row. A tough one at Kansas the other night. A tough non-call late kind of hurt them on the road at Kansas. They are our last team in. And our bubble teams out, New Mexico, again from the Mountain West, which we're going to discuss here in just a second. North Carolina desperately holding on to a spot. Wake Forest and Xavier. Xavier lost a game that could have put them in just recently. You got Indiana, BYU, SMU, and San Francisco, the next 4 out. Like, the bubble is shrinking for me because I don't think any of those teams really stand out and say, put me in the bracket without winning 2 or 3 games. But your thought about our bubble, those last 4 in or the first 4 out, any thoughts about any of those teams making a move?
Yeah, I would say New Mexico. They're, and we're going to talk about the Mountain West here in just a little bit. But right now we only have one team in from the Mountain West. I know we're not supposed to pick certain numbers from certain conference, but that's been a good conference. They put a lot of teams in last year, and so just from a realistic standpoint, I would think that you'd get more than one in, and New Mexico would be the next team in. So I think they're my top. They are our first team out, and they'd be the first team I'd look at putting back in.
And it's always interesting when we start discussing which teams to put in and which teams out. And that's where really, Steve, a win or a loss could make a difference in moving up or down a seed line, because those 8 teams have some tough resumes, and a good win will solidify their spot until the next game. It can turn in a hurry. If you are a fan of those 8 teams, or add Indiana or add someone else like that, you got to go on a winning streak. Get 2 or 3 and try to make some separation and get to the top of the 11 seed line, or get to the back end of the 10 seed line by winning 2 or 3 quad 1 games in a row, or 3 or 4. Get those quad 1 and 2s up so you can start separating. I think there's room to do that, but we're running out of time. I think there's 10 games left, about a third of the season left. And so resumes are starting to solidify quite a bit. Steve, let's go to our last call question for the evening here. You and I both love college basketball. We're blessed with being able to do this with the student group. And one of the things that you've always been a proponent of, and I have been as well, is the mid-major, or the less than major non-power conference. Last year, the Mountain West got, I think, 5 teams in, but they had an upset in their tournament, and that a lot of teams got seeded 2 or 3 seed lines lower, which meant the committee did not respect the quality of their quad 1 wins that were gathered in conference. So you wonder about the Mountain West. It's a conference you want to discuss. It's been good basketball in the past. Your thoughts on the Mountain West, and maybe the number of bids that they'll get, or they should get, according to you and I?
Yeah, because that conference kind of hurt us on our final picks last year, because we valued them a lot more than I think the committee did. And even though those they did put 5 teams in, I think a lot of those teams were just a seed or 2 lower than where we had them. So something to think about. How well does the committee look at the particular conference? Right now, of course, they'll get 1 automatic bid. Right now, we have it as Utah State. And then, like we said, that's actually take it back. We've got 2 teams in. Our last team out is New Mexico. First team out is New Mexico. So they would be the team to come back in. And then you also have San Diego State. I think you're used to, they just went to the Final Four a couple of years ago. They're 7-3 in conference. They're still in competition to win that conference. So those are the ones that you would most likely see in. There's a couple teams, Colorado State, Boise State, that have made the tournament in the past as at-large teams, but they've got some work to do right now. They're not out of it, but they definitely need to get some more quad 1 wins to be in consideration.
Yeah, I believe that's good basketball out there in the Mountain West. And last year they had a better run in the non-conference. That's why they had a lot of quad 1 wins, but the committee discounted them. So every committee's new, and some new people join in, so might be able to sway a committee one way or the other. But you got to think that if they didn't play as well this year in the non-conference, that how are they going to look at those resumes? I think they need to get 3 teams in at least. It's that good a conference. I think New Mexico has done a lot, but go win the tournament. That's one guarantee to get in the bracket, is to go win the tournament. For me, it's the Missouri Valley. I think the Missouri Valley really was these 2 conferences really were, I think, treated a little bit unfairly by the committee. And let me say this, I think the committee does a really, really good job. Over all the years, I've been doing this 11 years, I've really come to appreciate how hard it is and how difficult it is. And there's always going to be decisions at that back end that people can nitpick and find, and maybe a seed here or there that we have disagreed with the committee. But one of which we actually predicted it would happen. We didn't have Indiana State in our bracket last year because we kind of saw the writing on the wall. But Indiana State was the first team with a net better than 30 to be left out. And the whole argument about scheduling and opportunities and everything, but they really didn't beat anybody outside of conference that would have really moved the needle for the committee to do that. So what the committee was charged with, I think they did it right, but I wasn't happy with that decision. Well, I think we're back at that point now, too, with the Missouri Valley, which is good local basketball. My son was a manager at Indiana State, so I got to see a lot of those contests. Good coaches, good players. And you have two teams in Bradley and Drake who are battling it out. Bradley just got upset at home by Illinois Chicago. But both of those teams can make a run in Arch Madness in St. Louis, a great event. If you can get to that, it's one of the earlier tournaments of the basketball tournament season, the 2-week tournament. And whoever wins is going to be in. I think if it's Drake winning and Bradley, who is runner-up, I think there's a one-bid league. Drake is the only team that is on our radar right now for a chance to get inside, the tournament if they don't have the automatic bid. They are sitting at 17-2. They have 2 quad 1 wins. And they beat Vanderbilt, who is in the tournament. They beat Miami, Florida, who's having a really bad year. They've beaten Kansas State. So maybe the committee looks at like those are Power 5 teams that aren't doing well, but they're Power 5 teams, and you scheduled well. You scheduled these teams in some of the tournaments that could be played. They beat FAU, who was in the Final Four 2 years ago. So my thought is if Drake does not win, I think they're going to get serious consideration for an at-large bid. And maybe, Steve, that's kind of wishful thinking.
Maybe. And it seems like that Missouri Valley Conference is every year, when they've showed the teams on the bubble and they're all, when they're on Selection Sunday and they're showing the teams, they're the bubble teams that make it in, the ones that don't. It seems like there's always a Missouri Valley team that's sitting there on the bubble. Last year was Indiana State, and they're a conference that can win or die by how many bid thieves there were. And Indiana State was unfortunate last year. There were so many bid thieves, like NC State, that of teams that, won their conference tournament that otherwise would not have made it. And they essentially stole Indiana State's bid. So I'm sure a team like Drake, if they don't win their conference tournament, is going to be really rooting against those bid thieves because it can make all the difference.
I don't believe in free advertising, but I've really enjoyed my ESPN Plus subscription to watch some of these smaller conferences play basketball. Obviously, you have the SEC and the Big Ten games on. I have 4 TVs down here in the man cave trying to get my eyes on everyone because even the seeding for 13 and 14 seed counts in our bracket tournament that we do. So I try to get a handle on as many teams as possible. But I'm telling you, if you can find it to subscribe for just this month or a couple months here, the ESPN coverage of some of these conferences, there's good basketball, really good basketball being played across the country. And there's 31 conferences, and the television covers about 5 or 6 of them. And you get an odd game here on some other networks. But I really have enjoyed some of these smaller schools. And when it comes to their tournaments, too, because it is usually one and done, you got to get in by winning the tournament. Steve, any final thoughts before we wrap it up this evening?
No, I think that's it. I think we've put a lot of work into the bracket as we always do, but right now I kind of like it where everybody's at.
Coming up in a couple of weeks, I don't know the actual date. The reveal will come out, so we'll see the top 4 seeds as the tournament, as the committee has practiced doing that. They'll reveal that. That often tells us an awful lot. Steve will be covering for Delphi Bracketology the IU-Purdue game. If you see him there, say hello. I'm going to be home watching it on TV. I won't tell you my thoughts on that game, but we do appreciate the opportunities that we have as a group. Tune in to a bracket report on ISC Sports Network. You can find that on YouTube. We take sometimes a couple teachers, sometimes a couple students down to talk brackets on Tuesday. We record on Tuesday and it comes out Wednesday around 6:30 or 7. That show is now out. So you can see our earlier week discussion on brackets. That's where you can find us in our work. Also, look for us at DelphiBracketology.com. We put out a bracket every Tuesday and Friday. We'll update our seed list and bracket. We have some interesting photo galleries for you Purdue fans if you're listening. Our student photographers have been given access. We're on Twitter at Delphi Brackets, where if you have a question, you want to know what your team's resume or what your team might need to do, besides we just tell you they need to win, follow us on Twitter. We do have a donation page. I want to shout out, if you're listening or you listen to the podcast, we had a couple Iowa fans who pledged a certain amount of money. We won't share that, but a certain amount of money for every Iowa win. Iowa won 13 games. We have received those donations. That goes to our internet fees. We had to clean up a thing on the internet today that cost us some money. We appreciate all donations to our group so that we can continue to do a lot of things for us, because it is important for us teachers, but also for our students throughout the year. So you can check out that donation page. But that's going to do it here for this episode of Bracket U, the seed lines for Steve Painter. I'm Brian Tonsoni. Until next time, may your team win a lot of games.